Warning, viewer discretion is advised. All material is presented for educational purposes only. You hear that, YouTube? Educational purposes only.
Roll it!
You know, long ago, society experienced a very unique cultural era, or as some would describe it, a phase. It was a time many of you are familiar with, whether you've heard about it in legend or experienced it firsthand. We all know about the emo phase. They say write what you know, and this has been sitting in the depths of my collection of half-baked video ideas for a while now, but it's a topic very close to my heart because, as some of y'all are well aware, I too was once an emo kid. Still am, actually, at least when it comes to walking around in my human skin. What can I say? Everything matches with black. Just like my new shirts, available now if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Links below. But with Hot Topic as my church and my immortal my Bible, I lived that emo life and experienced my adolescence during the peak emo era, which folks have become rather nostalgic for nowadays based off of the TikToks I've seen. Honestly, this kind of adoration would have been nice when I was living through it because, fellas, we were not considered popular or cool. Like, the concept of an alternative e-girl was not a thing yet. We were all desperately crying out for help using our outfits and playlists. Actually wild how this is perceived as a glamorous time in retrospect, but I can't really blame folks considering what we are currently living through right now. Of course, with a video title like this, it's important to clarify the definition of emo, so we're all on the same page and we're not slap fighting over semantics. I am going to be applying this term rather broadly. I am fully aware of the different subcultural terms that could also be used to describe some of this stuff more accurately, such as goth, punk, alternative, scene, metal, whatever the juggalos got going on, but I'm mainly here to focus on an aura and a specific cultural shift that can really only be described as emo, cause
we're not talking about this or this, we're talking about...
So, what is emo? Well, if we're talking the dictionary definition, it's a style of rock music resembling punk but having more complex arrangements and lyrics that deal with more emotional subjects, or a fan of emo music or a member of the subculture associated with it. But if we were to ask what the meaning of emo is, it's
I am so lonely.
So the term solidified itself in the early 2000s music scene. You know, when bands like My Chemical Romance, Alizana, Bring Me the Horizon, Hawthorne Heights, Seosin, Silverstein, Chiodos, Pierce the Veil, and Paramore, along with plenty of others, were really making their mark. Their emotional lyrics, somber melodies, and darker styles quickly started to spread its way into the cultural zeitgeist. From the arches of Hot Topic to the mosh pits of Warped Tour and the back of the Spencers, emo quickly entered folks' vernacular and became a part of the new counterculture that encapsulated all things edgy and dark-sided, with a slight ironic and nihilistic humorous twist to balance it out. So the term could apply to art, fashion, movies, feelings, lifestyle, and that one Bionicle commercial.
Even when your hope is gone, move along, just to make it through.
It's a particular vibe most folks can determine at a glance due to the superficial characteristics. However, for more obscure things, a general litmus test to determine if something was or wasn't emo was simply if emo kids engaged with it. Converse, silly bands, and the I Heart Booby bracelets, for example, not emo to the eye, but they were associated with emo culture because they were staple emo kid accessories. So even if something wasn't aesthetically emo, the adoration from emo kids could easily label something as emo adjacent, like certain animes, and of course, video games. A lot of alternative folks back in the day loved video games of all genres, but I wanted to focus on when and why video games suddenly got noticeably more edgy. The emification of gaming, if you will. Historians will argue when this era truly began, but to apply a broad time frame to a broad word, the emification of gaming started around 2002 and ended around 2012, a solid decade of notable emo games on the market. Now, before this period, gaming has always had its fair share of dark-sided, edgy games, like the entirety of the Final Fantasy series can be considered emo adjacent, with all that it's contributed to pop culture, and for the fact that 80% of emo kids have played a Final Fantasy in their lifetime. You know who you are.
She's tampering in dark-sided stuff.
but here is a general collage of what popular gaming looked like around the end of the 90s. From the color palette alone, it's apparent that gaming had a wide variety of themes and aesthetics. Gaming was still very much a fresh-faced industry that had yet to scratch the surface of the kind of experiences it could deliver, but the market normally reflected the interests of the audiences, which did skew to younger players at the time, as they were the core gaming demographic. So edgy games were really just sprinkles on the gaming sundae. Titles like the original Alice, Final Fantasy, System Shock, Silent Hill, Shadow Hearts, The Bouncer, and Castlevania, respectively. However, it was the sixth console generation that really ushered in the emification of gaming trend. The aesthetic shift was incredibly apparent, especially when it came to sequels. Major established game series quickly embraced their dark sides, and titles that were once rated E for everyone suddenly became rated M for motionless and white. So, what happened? Well, there wasn't like an active campaign to make games more emo, that's for sure, but it was a few factors coming together at the same time that contributed to this noticeable shift. The biggest one actually being Grand Theft Auto 3. Originally released in 2001, Grand Theft Auto 3 was a monumental game that wore its rated M label with pride. Its reactive open-world design allowed players to go absolute crime spree banana mode on the whole city. You could drive 90 miles on the sidewalk, beat up prostitutes, do machine gun donuts, and fight the whole police force by bunkering down with your emotional support bazooka that you spawned in with cheat codes. It was raw, unfiltered criminal activity. And folks ate it up. The game sold well over 10 million units at the time, and the success signaled to the whole gaming industry that folks wanted more mature games, mainly because the biggest gaming demographics started to age. Wide-eyed 10-year-olds who bought the latest and greatest were suddenly angsty teenagers with morbid curiosity, bloodlust, and compulsive horniness. Compound this with the emo subculture brewing in the background, painting a very vivid picture of what dark and mature was supposed to look and sound like, and you've got the perfect conditions for edgy games to hit the markets in droves. But there was something else that happened in the early 2000s that greatly accelerated the cultural shift towards doom, gloom, and despair.
9/11.
The truth still remains that every major cultural movement can be traced back to 9/11 and Transformers. Obviously, the impact of 9/11 cannot be understated, as the whole world changed that day, and the ripple effects can still be felt now. But after that tragic day, the United States maintained a heavy existential dread in the air, since safety didn't feel like a guaranteed thing anymore. The disastrous war on terror that followed brought the deadly consequences of war into the forefront of the news again, and the blind, vengeful ambition of the Bush administration perpetuated general doom, gloom, and a mountain of propaganda years after. So the vibes were absolutely rancid as a result. But 9/11 was also directly responsible for creating My Chemical Romance. Gerard Way, the frontman and creator of the band, lived in New York at the time as a cartoonist and witnessed the towers collapsing. The carnage and chaos of the event shook him to his core so much it triggered an epiphany of sorts that pushed him to drop what he was doing and went full throttle on his music career. A few months later, My Chemical Romance was born. Now, as it relates to video games, there isn't a whole lot that connects MCR to gaming emification directly, but the style of the band helped solidify what the emo movement was all about. Of course, tons of bands contributed to this culture, lest we forget the punk rock and metal era that initially paved the way, but if you had to pick one band that was the poster child for the emo era, most folks would pick My Chemical Romance. And if you liked MCR, chances are you liked emo games. Now, a factor that explains the quick adoption of this new edgy, mature trend is the fact that game development times were not nearly as long as they are today. Whereas the average AAA game dev time is like 4 to 7 years now, during the sixth console generation, it was around 1 to 3 years, max, meaning game developers were able to seize the moment and create games that catered to the trends before they became outdated and tacky. So the emification of gaming is very, very apparent in sequels, many of which I will break down in this segment of video games that are oh so very emo. Starting off hot and heated, Jak 2.
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
Easily the biggest example of emification is the sequel to Jak and Daxter, Jak 2. To this day, the tonal whiplash is unmatched. The series went from colorful platformer collectathon adventure with a little dash of precursor darkness on the side to full-on dystopian fight-the-system action game with guns, crime, and Dark Jak dropping dark bomb dookies. Like, the tone shift was so drastic, the plot had to catapult the characters so far into the future that it's basically a completely new setting to host all of the hardcore shenanigans. The main enemies of Jak 2 are called metalheads, for God's sake. Of course, I know better than to put real metalheads and emo kids in the same basket. I understand and respect the differences, please don't yell at me. But the name choice is very on the nose. Like I said, I'm applying the emification term broadly, because at the end of the day, what goths, emos, punks, and metalheads all have in common is that they sure as hell ain't preps. Now, it's well known that the success of Grand Theft Auto 3 was the main reason why Naughty Dog felt comfortable making the tone shift so drastically dark, and it's also why they based the level design off of Grand Theft Auto 3 as well. Hence the major gameplay focus on carjacking, or rather, hover car jacking. But the tonal changes perfectly lined up with the general cultural shift, and Jak 3 continued the dark themes, except with a lot more hippy-dippy nonsense and sand. Another significant emo indicator is the fact that Daxter was dropped from the title of the game, despite being just as present as the first. But the brevity of the title does add to the edginess because Jak is a cool guy name, Daxter is an overtly comedic character, and we ain't got room for funnies in the series' household title, and Jak happens to be 3 letters, like gun, die, and emo. So in this case, brevity is not the soul of wit, but instead the soul of... And lest we forget, Jak be yappin' in this game compared to his mute teenage self. And this is also low-key emo, cause the man shares his intense emotions frequently.
You know what? Do it your way, and I'll do it mine. Just don't come crying to me when the walls fall down.
A necessary component to the true alternative lifestyle, wouldn't you say? Overall, Jak 2 was considered a very bold sequel, but it also took a very safe route when it came to giving the gamers what they wanted at the time, as Jak 2 ended up being one of the best games of 2003, and still hangs high in the Naughty Dog Hall of Fame. If only Naughty Dog actually remembered that. But to continue the rest of the emo list, we got Kingdom Hearts 2. So Square Enix in general is innately emo adjacent for reasons I'd already explained, but I've always described Kingdom Hearts as gateway emo culture, since the series strikes a harmony between the pop culture lightness of Disney and the heart-wrenching dark tragedy of the original Kingdom Hearts storyline. The series' narrative constantly reinforces this thematic duality with the whole light and darkness must exist in balance motif, truly the perfect family-friendly on-ramp to a more emo existence. Honestly, the whole series can be described as emo, but Kingdom Hearts 2 specifically is the most emo entry in the series to date, second to Days and Birth by Sleep respectively, but they also came out in the emification decade. Now, the series creator, Tetsuya Nomura, has always been an artist tapped into the happenings of the fashion world, as a majority of his character designs have been directly inspired by the latest fashion trends, and clearly the emo era made an impression on him, just how his work had an impression on the culture. Kind of a weird influence feedback loop when you think about it. Anyway, originally released in North America in 2006, Kingdom Hearts 2 was noticeably more dark and angsty compared to the first game, and introduced a whole bucket of iconic emo characters, moments, and styles. We got Roxas's whole existential existence.
What's going on?
Peep the checkered wristband straight from the Hot Topic shelves. All of Organization 13 dripped out in black coats and pointy-styled colorful hair. Sora, the series' happy-go-lucky protagonist, goes from a red jumpsuit apparatus to a black veil bride. Riku just be looking and acting like that. And the opening song Sanctuary is a sonically more somber tune compared to Simple and Clean, with its moody guitar riffs that punch you right through your heart. And then to top it off, the game's new enemies are called nobodies, accentuating the concept of nothingness. Because while emo culture thrived on saturated heavy emotions reflected through dark colors and ideas, a prevalent sentiment that complemented this superficial gloom was depersonalization and apathy, a fondness for emptiness, if you will. And what's more emo than the final boss of your game going on and on about how
nothingness is eternal.
The theme of battling with the legitimacy of your own existence and coping with the void in your heart is something most depressed emo kids could relate to, thus making Kingdom Hearts 2 the darkest entry to date. And perhaps if we're lucky, Kingdom Hearts 4 will eventually take up that mantle. Manifest with me, y'all! Shove all of your emo energy straight up Yazora's ass! Oh, and some other weird red strings that low-key connect Kingdom Hearts 2 to emo culture at large is the fact that Pirates of the Caribbean is a world featured in the game. And fun fact, the post-hardcore band Bring Me the Horizon actually got their name from the final line of that film.
Bring me that horizon.
Also, Kingdom Hearts 2 is directly responsible for bringing us this video.
What'd you do with Kairi? She's part of the darkness now. She doesn't need the light. You're a nobody!
I am not kidding when I say this was a cultural reset. In the fandom's eyes, at least. But you can't talk about dark and edgy games without bringing up the GOAT himself.
I'm going to destroy this damn planet.
So Shadow the Hedgehog, the character not the game yet, was initially introduced into the Sonic universe in Sonic Adventure 2 in 2001, and from here, he quickly became a fan favorite and mainstay of the series for being just so damn cool. Fast forward to 2005, and the world is blessed with the mess, Shadow the Hedgehog, where our little furry bundle of joy is off riding motorcycles, blowing stuff up, and glocking shit down. Cause there ain't nothing more hardcore than giving a sailored mouth, identity-confused, Latina-lovin' Ulipotifa a gun. The whole plot revolves around Shadow's attempts to learn about his mysterious past and who he really is. So rings for the emotional existential dread meter. Shadow is honestly a pro-ponderer like no other.
What happened to my past? That blue hedgehog, Sonic. Could we somehow be related? Who am I? I need to find the answer to that myself. For what purpose do I exist? Since this all started, something has begun to stir inside of me. My search for the truth is about to come to an end.
Of course, Shadow the Hedgehog famously featured different morality objectives in each level that changed the story path to the point the game has a combination of, get this, 326 possible routes. The objectives normally gave you the choice of helping the Sonic crew do their thing, snatching a Chaos Emerald and calling it a day, or siding with the villains by going full murder mode where nobody is off limits. So the game really allowed you to embrace the dark side, accompanied by a soundtrack that taps into a whole other level of edgy angst because... If there is one universal constant, it's that every Sonic game has amazing music. Like this track and many others went so hard at the Sonic Neon Summit karaoke room, let me tell ya. But what really adds to Shadow's emo energy is his relationship with Maria. Every melodramatic baddie needs a good tragic backstory, and boy does Shadow get it with her. He goes from stoic BFF5 ever with his girly pop to rage-filled revenge tornado of destruction because of what happens to her. If being forever haunted by the death of your loved ones isn't emo as hell, I don't know what is. Honestly, this game being on this list is pretty self-explanatory, cause Shadow's gotta be in the top most emo characters ever created, and his existence alone is why the Sonic franchise will forever be emo adjacent. Like, bro doesn't even have to dress the part, he's strutting the classic emo color palette of black, red, and white, totally butt naked. Now, I wouldn't describe myself as a Sonic expert since I have minimal experience with the series. More often than not, I rely on my Sonic mentor, some call me Johnny, to fill in the gaps in my knowledge, but as a relates to 9/11, I have to shout out the creator, Hannah Hyperfixates, for making this 2+ hour-long video breaking down how the War on Terror influenced Shadow the Hedgehog. They have done a more thorough job connecting the dots than I ever could, but it's safe to say that even the Sonic franchise wasn't spared by 9/11's ripple effects, cause you know, there was actually a third tower hit that day, society. But moving on from the Hedgehog and continuing on our Emification journey, we got Prince of Persia, Warrior Within. Released in 2004, here is another primo example of Emification hitting a sequel hard, going from this in Prince of Persia Sands of Time to this. Ubisoft set out to create a darker, more oppressive sequel, and they absolutely succeeded because the prince got the biggest brooding chip on his shoulder.
You bitch!
Watch your mouth, boy, damn! The game featured a ton of blood, violence, sad boy hair, and ass to accentuate that M rating. Honestly, there is something to be said about mature games leaning into more sexualized female characters, but I'ma just chalk that up to compulsive horny tendencies of the player base and the devs at the time. Like, this kind of stuff does feel very coming coming of age in more ways than one, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, being in his mature adult era, the plot follows the prince in his efforts to defy fate. You see, any person who messes with the sands of time is basically cursed and doomed to die. So throughout the game, the prince is pursued by demons trying to enact divine punishment. The prince obviously has a tough time coming to terms with his predicament, so a bunch of time shenanigans ensue to find a loophole, eventually leading to intense clashes with undead monsters and some scantily dressed baddies who like to explode. The game is absolutely dripping with hardcore edgy realness from head to toe though, both visually and sonically, because throughout the whole journey you are accompanied by the soothing sounds of chugging guitars. Not to mention the inclusion of I Stand Alone by Godsmack whenever you're being chased. You know, Godsmack. Well-known authentic Persian musical act, Godsmack. So Warriors Within is a great example of raw edginess that was definitely a phase since the direct sequel to Thrones lightened up a bit and focused on the prince dealing with his dark side instead of embracing it. Now, morally conflicted and moody protags are one thing, but Emification could also tap into a more carefree party energy, such as
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
Devil May Cry 3. Really anything relating to demons and devils can be considered a part of the emo culture, and Devil May Cry is no different. While Devil May Cry 1 and 2 easily fit the criteria,
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
it's Devil May Cry 3 that really captures the more over-the-top, exuberant side of alternative culture, juxtaposed to the demonic carnage motifs. Released in 2005, Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening follows a younger, much more carefree Dante in his adventure to settle beef with his power-hungry brother, Virgil, the real scene queen of this entry. But Dante's whole personality and demeanor is far from the average brooding protagonist. He's the kind of guy that would absolutely use XD and a text chat to annoy people and hang out with the emo skater raver theater kids while shotgunning a monster strutting his I Heart Boobies bracelet. But despite his nonchalant show-off attitude throughout the game, there are occasional moments of serious contemplation that show that Dante's flashy antics are more of a defense front for his loner tendencies. A lot of these instances come from his interactions with the other leading lady, when they both take moments to express their family issues.
Well, we have something in common. I have a dysfunctional family too.
And what would you know about family? You're a demon.
In fact, a big theme of the game is messy family relationships, whether it's dramatic, stylish showdowns with your super serious, callous twin brother, or a tragic, lead-filled confrontation with your piece of fucking shit dad. So the game maintains a healthy tonal balance because you go from scenes like this to this.
My family. This was all supposed to end by my hand!
It's the type of dynamic where, like, some emo kids were at their happiest and most animated because they were finally away from their families. In Dante's case, the dude is literally in this predicament because of his family and their legacy. Despite having a little burst of action-y fun, there's an underlying mood of inconvenience and annoyance in his tone, since he's the only dude with the power level high enough to deal with the familial matter. So Dante is always, begrudgingly, forced back into the family drama when all he really wants to do is eat pizza and be a cowboy rockstar ninja. Outside of the story themes though, Devil May Cry 3 just looks the edgy part. You got a massive ancient gothic demon tower filled with monsters and Jimbo Balatro's cousin running around causing mischief, all while the track Taste the Blood hypes up your combo streak. Everything just comes together to serve a cool, hellish flavor that only Dante can deliver. Now, Devil May Cry is a series that wasn't trying to conform to a dark entry trend since it was like that from its conception, but Devil May Cry 3 turned out the way that it did because it was a response and apology for how dull Devil May Cry 2 was. So, in essence, Devil May Cry 3 carries the energy of a skater emo kid whose Prozac works as advertised. Take your meds, y'all. But an example of emification being applied to a series that never really fit the darker criteria is Ratchet Deadlocked. Definitely the least emo out of the group here, but this is a game very much a product of the Emification trend because no other Ratchet & Clank title has this aura. In fact, no other Ratchet & Clank title has this title, as it too dropped the sidekick from the name, on account of Clank being a nerdy prep. But seriously, released in 2005, Ratchet Deadlocked, or Ratchet Gladiator in Europe, was the fourth entry in the series and still stands as the most edgy-looking title in the lineup. It actually kind of cracks me up how much Ratchet's little round furry face clashes with his new sharp and brutal body armor. Like, put that helmet back on, sweetie. You look low-key hilarious. They really were just giving anybody a hardcore phase back in the day. Pre-established vibes be damned. The developers over at Insomniac Games actively set out to make a darker, more combat-intense chapter in Ratchet's journey, and that's exactly what we get in Deadlocked. The story takes place in the Shadow sector of the galaxy and follows Ratchet's sudden involuntary entry into the televised reality gladiator show, Dread Zone, where he's forced to participate in round after round of deadly challenges, or else him and his crew will be terminated via shock collar. The gang situation is pretty dire throughout, as they are constantly dealing with the threat of death if they act out of line, and are consistently reminded of all the other contestants that have perished from the show in agonizing ways.
Amazing! I didn't know it was possible to beat that challenge. I mean, seriously, how many contestants have we seen get chewed up and spit out of it? What, 9? Is it 9? It's not 9, is it? What, 10 maybe?
Despite the intense premise, though, Deadlock does still feature the classic Ratchet & Clank satirical hyper-capitalism humor the series is known for.
It's time to blow it up!
Mainly taking potshots at how removed and indifferent everyone is from the horrors of Dread Zone because it's sold as entertainment and maintained by corporate greed. Like, Ratchet & Clank is no stranger to blowing someone up for comedic effect, but Deadlocked has a kid get nuked by a famous exterminator in a commercial to really drive the point home.
You're exterminating!
Now, a lot of the humor is delivered through the Dread Zone TV hosts, who constantly smear Ratchet's character as a killer criminal maniac who hates puppies and sunshine.
This creature is clearly much too dangerous to be set free. He must be destroyed!
So even though Ratchet is still acting like his normal go-getter self, the pictures the hosts paint is of a much darker entity. The levels themselves are also darker, since you're essentially trapped on planets that have been repurposed into elaborate combat arenas and obstacle courses. The first one even being on an old burial ground with zombies. Structurally, Deadlocked is very unique compared to the rest of the series, because it really just is battle after battle with occasional vehicle missions. No room for puzzles or even casual sightseeing that isn't blowing shit up. So even with new planetary backdrops, you're never really free from the violence of the battlefield. Hell, you could even interpret the premise as Ratchet being thrown into a war he didn't sign up for, which was a common sentiment in 2005. So Deadlock sits comfortably as the emo phase entry to its series, and the same can be said for the next game on our list. Persona 3, a game that is the most emo Persona ever and will never be topped. While everything else in this video could have other cultural terms used to describe them, Persona 3 wears emo on its sleeve. Look, there it is, right there. Originally released in 2006, Persona 3 follows the blue-haired protagonist's year-long journey at a new school where he dorms with other students with the potential, aka the ability to summon a manifestation of the inner self known as a persona. You're recruited into the group C's to combat the Dark Hour, a sliver of time between the end and beginning of each day where shadows run rampant and the local high school turns into a massive multi-layered tower called Tartarus. Stop me if you've heard this from me before. Now, the Persona series is famous for its overt themes, both narratively and aesthetically. In this case, Persona 3's topic of choice is death. Everything in this game connects back to death in some way, shape, or form. You got the masses suffering from apathy syndrome, aka advanced depression to the point of lifelessness. Every major character has dealt with or is currently dealing with some form of loss. You're constantly harassed by the Death Arcana reincarnate and a group of homicidal hooligans. You got the Persona Thanatos wearing a cape made of coffins.
Is that the Grim Reaper?
And the main means of summoning your persona is literally shooting yourself in the head. You know, imagery that's typically reserved for people contemplating some serious soup on the side. And not to flex my media literary skills, but the color blue tends to equal sad, which this game very much is. Also, the main character is literally the embodiment of every too cool for school loner who keeps his headphones in to keep the haters out. Now, Persona 3 was a monumental game that essentially created the modern Persona formula folks know and love today, but the devs at Atlus were no stranger to dark and mature ideas, since the whole Shin Megami Tensei franchise was built on them. However, Persona 3 was designed to cater to the youths while maintaining the trademark SMT heaviness. The themes were intended to accentuate the feelings of existential dread that were common amongst a lot of younger Japanese citizens on account of the country still dealing with the throes of the lost decade's economic despair. Like in the game, peoples whose minds succumb to shadows and are inflicted with apathy syndrome are referred to as the Lost, if the theme of hopelessness and meaninglessness wasn't already apparent. Despite all the saturated nihilism, though, Persona 3's underlying message encouraged folks to endure, even when facing down the certainty of death. The message is reinforced throughout, normally harkening back to personal connections and the power of friendship, giving folks the strength to persevere. But it's especially reaffirmed through the music, with songs like Burn My Dread. In fact, the music perfectly captures the emo duality of still living, despite not wanting to be around anymore. Or, as a wise man once said, sonically, the P3 OST has a very upbeat hip-hop style that can get anyone moving and grooving, especially when Lotus Shoe starts spitting bars. But lyrically, some tracks are depressingly transparent, so sad emotions run really high and look really cool in Persona 3. And at the end of the day, that's what being emo is really all about. But another facet of emification is melancholy, and no game does it better than Shadow of the Colossus. Created by Team Ico and released in 2005, Shadow of the Colossus was the follow-up to the critically acclaimed game Ico. Now, games created by Fumito Ueda have a distinct flavor to them. Dude absolutely loves his bleak ancient minimalism and somber atmosphere. Every single game, including the robot one we barely know anything about, harbors this unique essence in some way, like it's actually 100% iconic. However, Shadow of the Colossus is still the darkest entry from Team Ico, as one of the main themes is cruelty. In fact, this is another game influenced by none other than Grand Theft Auto 3. The violent boldness of the GTA experience made it apparent to Ueda that folks were absolutely down for more mature themes, and he wanted to present his own take on cruelty as a means of expression, and thus Shadow of the Colossus was formed. The story follows the protagonist Wander in his attempts to resurrect his deceased loved one. He steals a sacred sword, trots off to the Forbidden Land, and asks the spooky, ominous entity Dorman to help him out. Dorman's more than happy to zap Girly Pop back to life as long as you defeat 16 colossal monsters scattered throughout the lands. So that's what you do. You take off on your horse, gallop across the beautiful desolate domain, and start stabbing your way to a soul defibrillator. The game draws on a universal sense of loneliness. It's both relaxing and unsettling because minus the colossi, lizards, birds, and your horse, you are totally alone in this vast benign terrain. No NPCs, no optional side quests, no nothing. The long, peaceful gallops through the land are met with intense, large-scale, exhausting battles, creating a captivating contrast. The game really achieves that eerie, ethereal feeling because, story time, I first played Shadow of the Colossus when I was around 12 years old. The cover looked cool, but other than that, I had no clue what this thing was all about. Now, at the time, I had repurposed my closet into a little gaming nook with my PS2 hooked into one of them little CRTVs, and I got all settled into my pitch-black box to play my new game. However, I was also very hungry and felt lightheaded from a lack of lunch, and about 2 colossi in, I called it quits because the aura of the game made me extremely depressed for some reason, and the hunger I was feeling quickly turned into nausea after watching the protag get sprayed by black gas. The experience was so uncomfortable, I could practically taste bitter death spewing from these fellas, and I ended up returning the game as a result. Now, a few years later, I realized the error of my ways and gave it a second chance, calories included, and had a much more genuine time. To the point I appreciated the abstract verdant sadness, like there's still the satisfaction satisfaction of overcoming a massive foe, but that victory is short-lived because it's always greeted with a sad tune and a flurry of dormant darkness juices that kill the mood and knock you out. With the exception of the aggressive and annoying ones, it doesn't exactly feel great to even attack the Colossi, because most of them are strolling around completely oblivious to your presence, and when they take damage, you're just watching a large scared animal flail around trying to survive. So winning just feels tragic more than anything, but cruelty is necessary to achieve your end goal. Like, imagine having to slaughter your own cow every time you wanted a steak, or in this game's case, 16 cows for a human-woman-shaped steak. The conditions might make you second-guess your meal choice when you can see the fear in your food's eyes before it dies. And that's the case with Shadow of the Colossus, because with each Colossi killed, Wander just becomes more cursed and decrepit, eventually leading up to a finale where nobody really wins, except maybe Snuggie when the diapers need changing. So yes, while Shadow of the Colossus doesn't wear the traditional emo aesthetics, the heavy, bleak emotions this experience provokes was befitting of the edgy era. Also, Shadow is in the title, and it just looks like the hardcore brother of the bunch. Like, come on. But moving on to the Emo K Ultra of video games, we got Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. Yeah, we're back on that Square Enix train. Originally released in 2006, Dirge of Cerberus was the third-person shooter action game spin-off to Final Fantasy VII. It also happens to be the best video game ever made. The 6 out of 10 category in my head. Anyway, here's an excuse to show off my Vincent Valentine figure collection. Huh? What do you think? Aren't they handsome? But seriously, this game was a part of the early 2000s Final Fantasy VII resurgence that was meant to complement other projects like Crisis Core and the feature film Advent Children. Modern technology allowed the Seven universe to enter a new era of realistic HD sexiness compared to its humble PlayStation 1 days. So when the market started demanding more mature games, here comes revamped popular party member Vincent Valentine to give the gamers what they want. At least in theory. And here's the thing about Vincent. He is the most emo video game character ever created. I mean, just look at him. Dude's rocking the double V alliteration full name while strutting in a red cape and wielding a triple barrel gun. Like, get some bullets for my Valentine, y'all. Anyway, Dirge of Cerberus takes place a few years after the original Final Fantasy VII. The story follows Vincent in his battles against Deep Ground, the super secret experimental Shinra soldier division with sinister plans for the planet and a love for neon lighting. Vincent's one of the few people strong enough to actually deal with the threat, so you go on a journey to stop Deep Ground's murderous raids and lay down the lead law. The story's got high stakes, considering the fate of the planet is on the line, and also there are people casually dying in droves. But the emotion of the plot centers around Vincent's mysterious past and what tragic events led him to becoming a brooding borderline vampire who holds the chaos weapon in his chest. It's actually soap opera levels of drama out here. Young, good-hearted Vincent falls head over heels for the scientists he's ordered to protect, Lucrezia.
I'm the dumbest girl alive.
The lovey-dovey face doesn't last long, though, as the relationship is horrifically complicated by manslaughter, unethical experimentations, and hojo cucking.
Ew.
It goes really south, really fast, and all that can be said after is,
I'm so sorry.
Girl, shut up! So Vincent doesn't just look the part, he acts it, because despite being absolutely overpowered, capable, attractive, and charming, he just spends his modern days contemplating the shame of his perceived sins and yearning for his lost love, even though bro barely did anything wrong. He's got real guilt issues and a low-key martyr complex, because he's mainly haunted by his lack of action and feels responsible for the smoky, silver-haired tragedies that followed. Nevertheless, he always rises to the occasion and never fails to do good, even though he's a fleshy vessel for chaos. In fact, he's only able to control his chaotic powers because of the proto-materia, thanks to Lucrezia. So there's your metaphor for Lucrezia's love holding the demons at bay or whatever. You know, it's actually kind of funny how similar Vincent Valentine's and Shadow the Hedgehog's origin stories are. But then again, having undying love for the doomed women in your life is an emo essential. God, I wish someone looked at me the same way Vincent looked at Lucrezia stuck in that rock candy, though. The yearning, the longing, the sorrow just makes you feel like
Who are you talking to?
Nothing, Bubby! It's fine. Outside of Vincent's personal drama, though, the game features plenty of other edgy imagery, specifically the Sviets, the Deep Ground super gang of antagonistic weirdos who just love murder and anguish, like Nero, who sits comfortably in second place for most emo character design ever. Another Nomura classic, don't you know? But what submerges Dirge of Cerberus into the depths of edginess is the finale. The climactic showdown has Vincent going full chaos mode and fighting the planetary being Omega, all while redemption by Gak blasts in the background. Like, this is just what Dark-Sided Peak looked like back then. Appreciate it. Savor it. We will never get something like this ever again. Unless they remake it. I don't know. Despite Dirge of Cerberus having a lukewarm reception amongst gamers for its shallow level design and gameplay, its grandiose, edgy energy is why it's considered some folks' personal fave.
Oh, stop booing. There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
Oh, and another weird emo cultural string that connects the Final Fantasy VII is that Advent Children Complete, the director's cut re-release of the film from 2009, featured the song Safe and Sound by Kyosuke Himuro and Gerard Way. For some reason, the song is only in the Japanese version, but it's safe to assume that, yes, Nomura was very much aware of the emo era beyond the fashion realm. Square Enix definitely held up the mantle for early 2000s edgy games, but the emification trend spared no publishers, even those whose brand prestige relied on wholesome aesthetics, cause in 2006, the world welcomed in The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Now, I'll be real, I can't get into too many details because I'm actually saving a full playthrough of this game once I complete Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker. Follow me on Twitch to see it live one day. I was not a Nintendo girly growing up because of a lack of console access, so it's a blind spot in my personal gaming experience I'm trying to catch up on. However, you don't need to look that deep to understand that Twilight Princess is very much the edgy entry in the series, as it is still the only wholeheartedly rated T Zelda game. It's well known that the gritty dark tone and more realistic composition was an intentional contrast to the shell-shaded cartoon style of Wind Waker. Even Nintendo was privy to the changing demographic demands, so they decided to lean into the trend to get the mature gamers on board to get stronger sales. Now, Twilight Princess maintains the traditional Zelda foundation. Link is the hero, Zelda's booked and busy, and there are big baddies that need to be put down. But the imagery and gameplay gimmicks is what fuels the fuliginous flames, as the general theme is light versus shadows. For example, the game features the Twilight Realm, essentially the shadow realm of reality, where Link is transformed into a wolf. Okay, everyone knows furry and emo culture have crazy overlap. I don't need to explain it, you know who you are. Anyway, having Link be a dark-haired canine with a chain bracelet accent piece just checks off a massive edgy box that was definitely a few folks' furry awakening. The game constantly teeters between realms, so getting more in touch with your violent animalistic side was encouraged. Throughout the game, you are also accompanied by Midna, a sassy, mischievous little scene queen who loves bossing Link around and has things that rhyme with orange on repeat. So all of these shadowy elements come together to deliver one of the coolest, spookiest, and furriest Zeldas to date, helping solidify 2006 as one of the most emo years on record. The emification era did truly span a decade though, since it was almost expected that each year would have at least one established series release their edgy entry. Of course, the influx of hardcore games was only a trend responding to new mature demands, but the real long-standing pillars of emo gaming, long before it became cool, was basically every horror franchise: Eternal Darkness, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Dead Space, Haunting Grounds, Rule of Rose, Fatal Frame, and plenty of others. All of these are emo adjacent when you boil it down, because horror games are all about the different flavors of corn on macabre, often with some kind of psychological torture angle. Death, decay, trauma are all themes in most emo things, so of course horror games would appeal to folks suffering with their feelings. However, among the waves of terror, Silent Hill 3 stood above the rest, because every single alternative person I know with chronic depression loves this game. So yeah, this is definitely anecdotal, but the protagonist Heather was just so gosh darn relatable as she persists through the horny horrors. Originally released in 2003, Silent Hill 3 chronicles Heather's worst day at the mall ever as she's thrown into a hellish, decrepit otherworld and pursued by fleshy monsters, cultist weirdos, and bread. All while trying to solve the mystery as to why everyone suddenly cares about her so damn much. Now, Silent Hill 2 often wears the crown for peak psychological horror, but James's story is more focused on marital issues and chronic guilt. You know, middle-aged man problems. While Silent Hill 3 has 17-year-old Heather struggling with monsters beyond our wildest nightmares, Girlhood Edition. There's also the theme of identity and generational trauma that made Heather's teenage angst resonate with players, especially when she got sassy.
Don't you think blondes have more fun?
But she embodies every emo girl staring out the window with her earbuds in, listening to Like, you know this went so hard on someone's personalized MySpace profile back in the day. If that happened to be you, let us know. So while the entire horror genre continues to be the eternal bedrock of all alternative things, Silent Hill 3 just captured that early 2000s energy like no other. Alrighty, that wraps up all the notable individual spotlights, but this stuff truly was a decade-long trend because plenty of other games fit the emification criteria. So let's give them their black roses in this honorable mention showcase, starting with all of Guitar Hero. Okay, obviously Guitar Hero games were a trend in their own right that celebrated all things rock music from every era, but the series was adored by emo kids, and the game's popularity helped expose many folks to new bands a part of the culture. Can't say the same thing for its poser prep counterpart, Rock Band, though. Lines gotta be drawn somewhere, and I am confident in saying Rock Band is not emo. However, do you think a Guitar Hero girl and a Rock Band boy could ever fall in love? Comment below and let me know before we get Avril on the case. Anyway, another honorable mention is Tomb Raider 4: Angel of Darkness. Here's another example of an established series having an edgy entry. The game has Lara Croft on the run for suspected murder in an extra gothic version of Paris and Prague. The development of the game was a high-key mess, so it didn't achieve all of its dark ambitions. But the gritty intention was absolutely there, and the box cover and title passed the emo vibe check for sure. Rolling the focus back to Atlas, though, I gotta mention Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga. Honestly, Atlas just seemed like they were in a grim mood in the early 2000s, cause SMT3 Nocturne had a shirtless devil boy punching demons to death, and Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2 had cannibal tribes trying to reach heaven, Hunger Games style. Both of these tapped into the same morbid dark-sidedness that any emo kid could get behind, even though the aesthetics are more apocalyptic and dystopian. And you know who was also in a grim mood in the early 2000s? Capcom with Chaos Legion. Released in 2003, Chaos Legion was an earnest attempt by Capcom to go full gothic fantasy. This thing's got it all. Demons, blood, nihilism, sacrilege, spiky hair, and toxic yaoi. It's a game that was kind of lost to the 6th console generation since it didn't review too well, but that didn't stop the edginess from permeating the gamers to gain a cult following. Another honorable mention, or rather mentions, goes to 2009's Infamous and Prototype. Here are two series with similar anti-hero angles of being able to do terrible, gruesome things if you feel like entertaining your dark side. Now, both of these were brand new IPs at the time, so they hit the ground running with edgy energy and turned the morally bankrupt protagonist into a staple archetype of the early 2000s. Hell, you could even throw Kratos from God of War into this basket for funsies, cause he's a real anti-hero, soup on the cider too. Now, some games left no ambiguity and went all in on the dark vibes, such as The Darkness. Released in 2007, The Darkness answers the question of what would happen if you took a mafia hitman and possessed them with shadow tentacles who eat people's hearts. It was moody, gritty, violent, and aggressively Italian. It's a game that put every edgy cliche into a blender to deliver a supernatural horror action classic that would make Venom proud. Of course, not every dark theme game took itself so seriously, because amongst all of the brooding boys was Bayonetta. Tonally, this game is a wacky, sexy spectacle with countless slapstick gags, but emo culture did lay claim to all things witches and demons, which Bayonetta has plenty of. Similar to Devil May Cry in more ways than one, Bayonetta embodies the fun of living on the sensual dark side, while slapping angels around and sipping on martinis at the gates of hell. Now, realistically, Bayonetta would probably scoff at a group of emo kids for being too mopey, but they would absolutely adore her from afar. Bayo is just an league of her own, and we just have the pleasure of watching. Now, on the flip side of high-energy demonic tomfoolery was brutal minimalism, best presented in the 2010 indie game Limbo. Yeah, talk about bleak, because Limbo was the epitome of an oblivious child getting his shit absolutely rocked in an unforgiving world. The game relied heavily on its unsettling silhouette imagery, oppressive atmosphere, and cruel carnage to provoke a deep sense of vulnerability and loneliness that no antidepressant could combat. Like any emo kid who said Limbo was their favorite game is probably emo for life. And if you happen to know anyone like that, check in on them, okay? But keeping these good honorable mention vibes going, we got Near Gestalt. Released in 2010, Near Gestalt hits you with every type of tragic existential despair known to man. and robot. Honestly, the only thing putting this game in the honorable mentions category is the fact that the initial Western version did not feature Brother Nier, but instead Father Nier, who mostly just gives off confused mad dad vibes. It's like the equivalent of being chaperoned in the mosh pit. So Gestalt is not aesthetically emo, give or take Weiss's magic, the Shade's designs, and Emil's bones, but the palpable hopelessness is absolutely baked into everything, and the game's concept was originally inspired by, you guessed it,
9/11.
The music is also guaranteed to make you cry, so all in all, Nier Gestalt is what I like to call transcendent emo, because it tends to hit folks dealing with suicidal ideation the hardest. Now to dip in some potential discourse, the next honorable mention is Demon Souls. Okay, now Knights and Dragons are innately emo, however, everything being a little fucked up looking with the world on its last hopeless gasp is. Released in 2009, Demon Souls slowly gained a cult following for defying every conventional video game design choice. Its conviction was so radical that it's literally what created the Souls-like formula that has now flooded the industry. The atmosphere of Demon Souls was crushing with despair, and the frequency of death was designed to provoke a sense of tension and struggle that could only be remedied by overcoming difficult odds. Honestly, the Souls series in general is an excellent example of emo-adjacent art on account of the consistent morbid aesthetics and the series director Hidetaka Miyazaki being a glutton for eldritch punishment and endless cycles of grotesque melancholy. And last, but definitely not least, the video game that never was, Final Fantasy Versus 13. Now, folks today will recognize this as Final Fantasy 15 from 2016, but the concept was initially a part of the Fabula Nova Crystallis series, a collection of spin-off titles a part of the 13 universe. Originally announced in 2006, Versus 13 was supposed to be Nomura's emo magnum opus. The trailers featured the cool and collected protagonist Noctis wielding his engine blade and making a bloody mess of his enemies in various magical ways, while his kingdom is under fucking attack. Obviously, people never got to experience the initial version of Noctis' story, but hype around this game made a lasting impression, to the point it's considered an emo classic in folks' hearts. And it's a concept with so much aura that it was repurposed 10 years later, and possibly beyond. Keep manifesting that energy, y'all. Send it straight up his butt! So there were whole games that embraced the mature, edgy trend, but even titles with more neutral vibes also had a little dash of emification in the way of characters, such as Raiden from Metal Gear Solid 2, cause emo was the only word people used to describe a pretty man with long hair in 2001. I feel like nowadays we would just settle for twink, but you know, whatever. But there's also Lulu and Pain from Final Fantasy X and X-2, obviously, Vivian and Boo from the Mario series, cause why not, Kasumi from Mass Effect 2, Soren from Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, and there's just something innately emo about big daddies and little sisters from BioShock. I don't know, are y'all seeing what I'm seeing? I might be off on this one, let me know. Anyway, by 2012, the emification of gaming was coming to an end, and these types of games became the occasional treat instead of a consistent meal. Titles like Epic Mickey, Catherine, and Alice Madness Returns maintained an edginess aura to them, but in a one foot in, one foot out kind of stance. Having an edgy entry in an established franchise was turning into a cliche, and what was once seen as bold, dark, and mature was now starting to look kinda corny and juvenile, on account of the trend being properly commercialized and morphed into the ever-vague alternative scene bubble, sitting comfortably as just another facet of pop culture. 2012 is also when the emo music scene was growing stale and generic, all while Taylor Swift had been growing her powers in the shadows, ready to strike. Well-known artists were either dropping off entirely, rebranding their sounds and styles, or just going through the audible motions with occasional hits. Like even My Chemical Romance had lightened up with their Danger Days album in 2010, leading into a post-apocalyptic punk rock aesthetic with songs tame enough to get featured on Glee. In general, folks just weren't feeling nearly as nihilistic anymore, as the aforementioned rancid vibes ran their course, and two big cultural moments played into that. The first one being, the world did not end in 2012. Yeah, you'll remember that hoopla? There was a brief period where the general public just kinda bought into the hearsay idea that the Mayan calendar might be predicting the end of the world in 2012. For God's sake, there was a whole movie that fueled that phenomenon. You know, I have a fond memory of being at a friend's birthday party on the alleged doomsday, and we all stood outside during the sunset singing Amazing Grace while holding hands in a big circle in the off chance the prediction was correct. Obviously it wasn't, but it was a funny bonding moment regardless. Anyway, 2012 came and went, and all the folks secretly longing for the world to end had to keep persevering in life. So there goes accepting the loving embrace of death out the window, and hello, opening the door to the live, laugh, love era. The second big cultural moment was that Obama got reelected. While his first term was paved with the promises of hope and a better tomorrow, by 2012, folks seemed pretty content with the way things were going and signed up for another 4 years. Optimism and good vibes were absolutely in the air as a result, and that's when shuffling, Duggan, and Harlem Shakin' were becoming global pastimes. In short, by 2012, emo was out and swag was in. But the legacy lives on. Even though gaming has evolved past the edgy cultural phase, emo games still exist, and emo stuff in general has become nostalgic and cool again. The broad alternative bubble isn't viewed as an outcast corner anymore, but rather the other side of the pop culture coin. Major established artists have repurposed and evolved the dark aesthetic to fit with modern sensibilities, and the emo kings of old are still as popular as ever. So while the emification of gaming was a reactive trend that catered to changing demographics and interests, modern games that dabble in darker themes, alternative styles, and nihilistic humor are simply products of passion and vision. Titles like Final Fantasy XV, Undertale, Devil May Cry 5, Bloodborne, Nier Automata, Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, Death Stranding, Code Vein, Hollow Knight, Amori, Reaper Overwatch, and most recently, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Oui, very French emo indeed. So what was once seen as a melodramatic phase has now looped back into being an authentic style. From the abundance of e-girls, the wide appreciation of anime, the commercial success of Stray Kids, and whatever the hell that corpse husband thirst phase was during COVID, emo culture has been successfully recycled for a new generation to tap into their dark side. Many of the bands that initially ushered in the emo phase still exist and have adapted their sounds to thrive in the current cultural climate, some of which connect straight to gaming now, like Bring Me the Horizon and Death Stranding with their song Ludens, or Kellen Quinn, the lead singer of Sleeping with Sirens, being the vocalist on the Sonic Frontier soundtrack, which fucking bangs, by the way. If you have not listened to it, please listen to it. It's actually what convinced me to buy Sonic Frontiers, no joke. Also, the song Vandalized by When OK Rock plays in the credits. Overall, excellent music. The universal truth of Sonic remains. And of course, most recently, the Elden Ring Night Rain marketing going full AMV mode with the Bring Me the Life trailer that got everyone gushing over Evanescence again. Seriously, look through the comments. I haven't seen the gamers hooting and hollering over marketing like this in a long time. You know, the heavy emotions that are at the center of all things emo are really just universal dark themes that can manifest in any concept. Like, why is it so many depressed, angsty kids gravitate towards dark tones and morbid ideas? Because it's low-key comforting. Being able to take the burden of unbearable emotion and channel it into beautiful, profoundly macabre art is soothing to tortured souls. You are not alone, and those feelings of despair are often shared and can eventually help you find meaning through the dark. There are countless labels that could apply to these vibes and movements, but when you boil it down and remove all historical and cultural context, you are left with the constant push and pull that makes up the essence of existence. Light and darkness, yin and yang, life and death, with every single shade of gray in between. Life is made up of opposites, whether they attract or conflict. Everything and everyone harbors and lives through these complementary contradictions, and depending on the circumstances, our own inner light and darkness ebbs and flows, which eventually manifests into our creations, taking form through art, actions, and abstractions. All of this to say, emo can never truly die. It's simply reborn with each new generation adding their own flair to the mix to keep the inner darkness alive, regardless of the label it takes on. So, now that we've come to the end of this little retrospective, I ask you, viewer, was it really ever a phase? Yo, yiggity yo, welcome to the end of the video. First of all, I want to thank my amazing wife for all of her hard work in assisting this video, and also Forever KT for lending his ideas and 3D modeling skills. Also a shout out to Lady Emily for giving me the courage to follow through on this project in the first place a few months back. However, this channel keeps on humming thanks to my amazing patrons. If you want to support the channel and get more content, consider becoming a part of the Buns Research Division. Links below. But if you want to watch more casual stuff in the meantime, consider checking out out my side channel, Super Extra Buns. Still not dead though, y'all, and I still got some stuff up my sleeve, perhaps sooner rather than later. So, until then, toodles.